Hello. In this video, I'm going to just go over the questions on the practice test for the final exam. Just a word of caution: the practice test only included questions about contents that we discussed after the midterm, but the actual final exam is going to include some questions some of the questions are going to be about the contents that we discussed before the midterm. But I mean, the majority of the question, I would say more than 80% of the questions are going to be the contents that based on essentially analysis of covariance, multiple regression analysis, and the 3 different applications of multiple regression analysis. So the practice mainly is provided as a example, so you are familiar with the kind of questions that you can expect. Okay, but let's go over these questions, and I'll talk a little bit about the strategy, kind of what's the best way to approach those problems during the exam. Let's see. So the first question, of course, you know the drill. Is going to be about an honor pledge, and you know what the correct answer is. So next one. The next question, a set of questions rather, is about a scenario, and in this case, an SPSS output. So a multiple regression analysis was conducted to predict the RIF self-acceptance with the following 7 predictors. So age, sex, extrinsic motivation, and etc. So it provides you with the model summary, the analysis of variance and ANOVA, and the coefficient, the regression coefficient. Now notice that we have 1, 2, 3, 4 models, statistical models. And that is actually quite important when it comes to answer those questions. Now, whenever you have a scenario, my suggestion is that you spend a little time, maybe a few minutes, analyze the situation and just kind of figure out really understand the scenario and SPSS output before you actually start to answer the individual questions. This will actually save your time once you figure out, once you analyze the situation, once you know what's going on, it actually prepares you to answer the next set of questions. So I'm going to switch to a Microsoft Word document. So this is a kind of a little bigger, so it's easier for us to see. Now let's read the scenario. A multiple regression analysis was conducted to predict self-acceptance, right? So this is what do we have? The dependent variable. This is a dependent variable. And with the following 7 predictors. Okay, so age, sex, extrinsic motivation, and etc. So this multiple regression analysis was conducted with 1 dependent variable and 7 independent variables. All right, so keeping that in mind, and so we can see what's going on here. How many models the analysis produced? It produced 1, 2, 3, and 4 models. And we have just a standard output. So R is a multiple regression coefficient. Now remember that R is the correlation between 2 values, right? Between Y and Y prime. So predicted and measured values of the dependent variable, of the criterion variable. That is the definition of R. And what about R squared? Now we understand what R squared tells us is the proportion of variance that can be predicted by the regression equation. So for example, we have here the model number 4. It predicted 45.6% of the variance. And so that's how we interpret the R and R squared. And of course, we have ANOVA. You notice that in this case, everything, all the models, 4 models, were statistically significant. And we also have this coefficient table. Now, one thing you'll notice, actually, is that in all 4 models, everything, I mean, all predictors were statistically significant. Now, when it comes to model number 4, I just like to call your attention, model number 4 included 1, 2, 3, and 4 predictors. Okay? There are 4 predictors. Now, how many independent variable, how many predictors were entered into the regression equation, were entered into the regression analysis? Remember, we said 7. So out of those 7 predictors, 4 were selected for, were included in the multiple regression model. This information actually is quite important when it comes to the first question, which is basically what type of multiple regression analysis was conducted. Now, is it a standard? Obviously, no, because a standard multiple regression analysis would have included all 7 predictors in the equation, right? And is it hierarchical? Well, remember the hierarchical multiple regression analysis, the researcher would specify which predictors enter the regression equation and in the specific order of entry, which variables goes in first and which one goes to later, and etc. But again, 7 predictors would have been specified by hierarchical multiple regression if that's what's conducted. So hierarchical multiple regression is not the case. Now, what about stepwise? Is it possible that we conducted a stepwise multiple regression? And the answer is yes, because in a stepwise multiple regression analysis, you select one and the next and the next. So in a stepwise multiple regression, you're going to see this exactly what we see here. You have more and more variables, predictors, enter the regression equation, and you can get multiple models. And all the predictors selected for stepwise multiple regression has to be statistically significant. So that's the situation, what happens here. All right, so now we have analyzed the situation. We are ready to answer the questions. So first question, what type of multiple regression analysis was conducted? And we know it's stepwise. Next question is the same scenario, so let's see what the question is about. In model number 4, the multiple correlation R equals 0.675. This means that something equals 0.675. So this question is a straightforward question about the definition of multiple correlation coefficient, capital R. Okay, so which one of these it describes that definition? It's the correlation between measured value and the predicted value of the criterion variable, right? So it's the correlation between, no. Maximize the correlation between self-acceptance and the best predictor, no. It's the correlation between self-acceptance and the residual, no. It's the correlation between the measured and the predicted self-acceptance. That is the definition, the correlation between R and Y and Y prime. Next question. What proportion of a variance in self-acceptance can be predicted by regression model number 4? So that's a question about R squared. And it's 45.6%. So 45.6% is the answer. So R squared. Next question. Mike decided to adopt a regression model number 2 for simplicity. He reported that approximately 40% of the variance in self-acceptance can be explained by anxiety and extroversion. So model number 2 included these two, anxiety and extroversion. So which of the following is the correct interpretation of this result? Now, this question is not about statistics, it's about the interpretation. So when we say 40% of the variance can be predicted by something, what do we mean by that? So this is boiled down to the question of when we conduct regression analysis or when we conduct correlation analysis, we have the evidence for relationship, for correlation, for association, but not causality, right? So this is the point this question is trying to address. So let's look at these possible answers. Approximately 40% of variance in self-acceptance can be predicted by anxiety and extroversion. That sounds correct. So let's click on that, but let's also check the other three. Since the regression model could explain only 40% of the variance, it is not useful. No, that's not correct. Approximately 40% of the variance in self-acceptance was caused by, no, that's incorrect. If Mike were to predict the blah, 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 his prediction would be correct in approximately 40% of the time. That's incorrect either. Right? So correct answer is the first one. It tells us how much of variance can be explained by something. Next question is about, consider regression number 4. Which predictive variable had the strongest relationship with self-acceptance? Now, which one has the strongest acceptance? For that information, we would look for the standardized regression coefficients. Now, in a different context, if we were looking at the using multiple regression analysis to test path model or mediation, then remember the effect size, the size of that effect is measured by the standardized regression coefficient or the beta coefficient. So we're looking for the size of the beta coefficient, and regardless, it can be positive, it can be negative. We're just looking for the one with the highest absolute value. So the highest absolute value comes from anxiety, which is negative 0.415. So it's the anxiety was the strongest, has the strongest predictor. Okay, so next question. It's still the same scenario. Based on the regression results, an individual with a higher level of extroversion is expected to have higher or lower or the same level of self-acceptance. So that we just look for direction, right? Direction. If it's a positive, then the two changes in the same direction. If the path coefficient or the standardized regression coefficient is negative, then they change in the different direction. So now we are looking for extroversion and self-acceptance. So it's positive. It's positive. It means they change in the same direction. So higher level of extroversion is expected to have higher level of self-acceptance. All right. Then we'll move on to the next question. Okay, so here we are looking at a scenario number 2. So this is a path model. We should recognize that instantly that we are looking at a path model. So let's check this. And when you look at the path models, the couple things you always think in terms of, okay, so how many, which ones are intrinsic variables? So that's intrinsic, right? And self-acceptance is also intrinsic variable. and it's a positive versus negative. This is the direction of the relationship, right? So the extroversion is expected to be negatively related, negatively impact anxiety. Means if you are more extroverted people tends to have less anxiety. So the plus and minus sign indicates the predicted direction of the relationship. And you probably also recognize that intrinsic, if we remove intrinsic motivation, then we would be looking at essentially a mediation model in which anxiety is proposed as the mediator, the one that explains the relationship between extroversion and self-acceptance. But overall, we are looking at a path model. Okay, so now we have analyzed the situation. We are ready to answer the questions. Okay, so this model is a path model. That's easy. Next question. According to this model, individuals with a higher level of intrinsic motivation would have a higher level of self-acceptance. Positive means they change in the same direction. So if it's higher in intrinsic motivation, it's higher in self-acceptance. Next question is about Ashley decides to test the model using multiple regression. What information from the regression results should she use for the path coefficients? Now we know that's an easy question. Standardized regression coefficients. That's in this context, we call them path coefficients. Next question, suppose obtained is the following path coefficients. So if you see a question like this, my suggestion is actually use a piece of scratch paper and actually draw those numbers and put those numbers on the, just once you have those numbers on the diagram, it's actually much easier for you to think about the answer the question. So according to the question, you have a negative 0.30 there, and you have a negative 0.40, and this is 0.50, and intrinsic motivation to self-acceptance is 0.20, and everything is significant at least 0.05. So meaning we have everything that's statistically significant. All right. So it's always, by the way, it's always easier to answer some of the questions if you use a piece of scratch paper. It helps you to visualize, helps you to actually it helps you to relieve some of the burdens to your working memory so that you have more mental capacity to actually analyze the situation. That's why it is always a good idea to draw a diagram, put the information on a piece of paper, and then you can think about what answer you might have. So let's see what this question is about. What is the total effect of extroversion on self-acceptance? Okay, so we are asking, what is the total effect of extroversion on self-acceptance? Now, there is a direct effect, and there is also an indirect effect that go through anxiety, right? So the total effect equals the sum of the direct effect, which is 0.5, times the indirect effect, which is the the product of the path coefficients times negative 0.40, which equals, so 0.5 and negative times negative is a positive, 0.12, so 0.62. That's the answer. Okay, so total effect of something on something, it's the sum of the direct effect and indirect effect. And indirect effect in path model is calculated as the product of the path coefficients that completes the path. So 0.62 is our answer. Next question, if we are to test this path model using multiple regression, how many multiple regression would we need to conduct? So we have two intrinsic variables, right? Two endogenous variables. Two endogenous variables. So we need one regression analysis for each endogenous variable. And we need one for this, anxiety, and we also need one for self-acceptance. So the answer is 2. Next question, if we only consider extroversion, anxiety, and self-acceptance of the path model, variable anxiety would be considered a mediator, right? It's a mediator. Okay, question 14. Okay, so question 14 about something else. Cohen and Willis proposed a stress buffering hypothesis. They suggested a positive relationship between social support and quality of life. And this relationship depends on individuals' stress level. So the relationship between the social support and the quality of life stronger for people experience a lot of stress. Okay, so a relationship is stronger in a certain scenario, but it is weaker in some other scenario. That describes a moderation. It's an interaction, right? It's the interaction. Next question. So let's see. Examine the developmental relationship between early perceptual ability and face perception in infancy. What type of relationship illustrated by the following result of the analysis of the study? So we should recognize immediately it's mediation, right? It's mediation. So that's significant. That's significant. So the indirect effect was significant. Now, before we add this mediator, the relationship between these two were significant. But once we included the mediator, this relationship was no longer significant. So therefore, we considered a complete mediation rather than partial mediation. Let's see. Okay, so let's consider the following set of relationship. So studies, positive relationship between socioeconomic status and frequency of breast self-exam. In addition, the relationship between the two were stronger for older women and less strong or non-existent for younger women. So right here, we saw that age is the moderator of this relationship, right? So the relationship between the two becomes stronger or weaker depending on what? Age. And furthermore, the relationship between SES and BSE completely disappeared once education is taken into consideration. Once we add education, the relationship between the two disappears. So education is a mediator. It actually describes the complete mediation, because once education is taken into consideration, there's no longer any relationship between SES and BSE. So, question, which variable is a moderator? Its age is the moderator. Next question. Okay, so what does this diagram on the right illustrate? So this is easy. Simple slope. And we should also know that a simple slope is a part of the analysis of moderation, right? Once moderation turns out to be statistically significant, the next step is analysis of simple slope. Okay, done. So yeah, so current score got 16 out of 16, and very good. This is just a practice test. It's a means to for you to get familiar with the kind of questions that likely going to be answered, like you are likely going to encounter in the final exam. So let me know if you have any questions. Just use, you can just post your questions on Canvas, one of those discussion forum, or you can just send me email, use Canvas inbox. Okay, so I hope you find this video helpful, and yeah, so good luck. Okay, bye.